We got a couple of folks trickling in right now. I just wanted to mention again, over here to my right and your left, we have a sign-up sheet where you can win one of a couple of books that Dr. Finn has been involved in. And so if you'd like to sign up to get a chance to win one of those, then please do so. Thank you for coming out for the library talk today. My name is Jason Fowler. I'm the Director of Library Services here at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and I have with me today, as our guest, Dr. Nathan Finn. Dr. Finn and I have known each other for 20-some-odd years now.
20 years.
Yeah. And so we met at Southern Seminary years ago, and the Lord has just blessed my life with Dr. Finn. Really, really thankful for you being here, brother, and yeah, it's just a blessing to have you. Dr. Finn is Provost and Dean of the Faculty at North Greenville University. He's also teaching pastor at Taylor's First Baptist Church in Taylor, South Carolina, and he serves as the SBC Recording Secretary, which is kind of like in baseball serving as the official scorer, something like that, wouldn't you say?
I think so. That's fair.
Yeah, something like that. And then he's taught here and served here at Southeastern as a faculty member. He's also taught at Union University. And most importantly, he's married to Leah and has 4 kids, which he calls the Finleys, Georgia, Baxter, Eleanor, and Fuller. They're a hoot. They're all great to be around too. But thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
So really quick, we'll start with just 5 questions that have nothing to do with our topic. So our topic today is Baptist education in the church, but we're going to do just as an icebreaker, 5 quick questions. So you're a University of Georgia fan.
I am.
Will University of Georgia three-peat this year?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I love the confidence. I love the confidence. So barbecue, mustard or vinegar based?
Mustard is the only one of those 2 things that's actually barbecue.
All right. So we've got the Major League Baseball season is about to start.
Amen.
We're both Braves fans.
Right?
We bonded over this. So Vaughn Grissom or Braden Shoemaker?
Vaughn Grissom. Love that guy.
I'm going with Orlando Arcia.
You think so?
He was named starter yesterday.
Sorry, I've been too busy lecturing to pay attention to that, but okay.
U.S. and Japan play tonight. That's in the World Baseball Classic. We know who you're pulling for, but who you got going into this game?
America.
America. I love it. All right. And what's something in your Spotify playlist that others don't necessarily appreciate, but you do?
Creed.
Creed, I love it. Yeah, I was listening to Creed the other day. There is something about jock rock that's just, it's great to rock out to. So, all right. So let's get to the question or the issues of Baptist education in the church. And I want you to start with just telling us about your experience with Baptist education.
My experience with Baptist education is nearly all of my higher education and most of my career. So I'm a product of Baptist education. After 2 years at a community college in my hometown, graduated with a 4-year degree from a state Baptist college in Georgia, went to Southern Seminary to begin an MDiv, finished an MDiv here, did a PhD here, have taught full-time at one Southern Baptist Seminary, adjunct at a second Baptist Seminary, and have also taught at 2 Baptist universities. And so my whole adult life is wound up in Baptist education. And it's been really formative for me. I really wanted to go to a state university, and my parents, who were believers, but they weren't big God talkers. Like, they weren't the sort of people who said, we've been praying recently in XYZ. But my mother took me out to a Chinese restaurant for lunch, and she said, you know, your dad and I have been praying. and we know that you want to go to fill in this blank state university, but we feel like the Lord is leading us to tell you to go to Bruton Parker College in Georgia. And again, my parents didn't talk that way, and so when my mom said that, I took that really seriously, and that's completely in God's providence changed the trajectory of my life. I was called to ministry before then, but I'm reasonably confident I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I had gone and majored in history at a state university, even very involved in the local church and campus ministry and things like that. There's no doubt the Lord was in my journey in Baptist higher education.
So you've recently taken on a church-related role. You're a teaching pastor at Taylor's First Baptist Church in Taylor, South Carolina. Tell us just a little bit about what that role looks like and what you're doing there, who you'll be teaching, and kind of what your hopes are for those that you'll be teaching.
I appreciate that. So served in church ministry roles over the years, but for about 15 to 16 years, had prayed very seriously off and on that the Lord would open up a bivocational or co-vocational kind of indefinite staff position that was suited to my gifts. And it was never like a front burner issue, but just always in the back of my mind, Lord, would you do something like that? And so in the providence of God, our good friend Josh Powell, about almost 2 years ago, became the lead pastor of Taylor's First Baptist Church, reached out to me and pitched this idea of teaching pastors. That's you find that title fairly commonly. It means different things in different churches. At Taylor's First Baptist, it means three things. It means I'm probably the one who's preaching when the senior pastor isn't preaching, unless we have an outside speaker. So I'm kind of the default preacher whenever he's not preaching. It means I'm filling in for him on Wednesday nights. He has a pastor's Bible study that he teaches, and I fill in for him some with that. But the major thing that it means is we're launching an initiative in the fall that we're calling the Taylor's Institute. And unlike many institutes at churches, that's kind of this is where you get seminary credit in the local church. We do that, but that's not the Taylor's Institute. The Taylor's Institute is really lay theological formation. And then what we're looking at is that we have a congregation that loves the Bible. They love the Bible. They love expository preaching. They love conversation-based exegetical small groups. They love those things. But like most churches, not everybody in our congregation always does a great job of sort of putting the themes together or applying the scripture to topics. And we don't think the solution to that is topical preaching. We would rarely do that. We think the solution is teaching things like theology and church history and ethics in the local church for lay people, not for any sort of credit, but just to help form them as disciples and help them to dig deeper. And we also hope that the Lord is going to use the Taylor's Institute as a venue for calling out the called. We have a church filled with leaders, and some of those leaders probably should be considering seminary, or they should be considering the mission field or church planting or being part of a church planting team. And so we're hoping that as folks say, you know what, I would love to take an 8-week class on basic Christian doctrine for regular people on Wednesday nights, that the Lord uses that to stir their affections and to call them into some sort of ministry. And so we're still figuring this out. I just started in January, but as I've joked with a number of my friends, what it really is kind of like a theologian in residence role, but that sounds super scary in Southern Baptist churches, and so we call it teaching pastor.
That's great. So, you're a historian.
Allegedly,
No,
yes.
You are. So you're a historian. You know as much, I think, about Baptist life and what Baptists have done in history as anyone I know. So give us kind of an overview of kind of the high points of Baptist education over the years.
So Baptist education goes back to the 1670s with Bristol Baptist College, or the institution that became Bristol Baptist College. It's the oldest Baptist college in the world. And in America, it goes back to what we now call Brown University. There's not any one pattern in Baptist education. So there's not like one paradigm that was used everywhere. But there's a general trajectory. And the general trajectory has been Baptist education has begun with forming ministers. And then once you establish that, say, who else do we need to be forming? And so most of our colleges and universities, which have been around longer than the seminaries, began as kind of a combination of the classical liberal arts and theological education and how do you train ministers? And then how do you train other people? And then from the time we started adding seminaries in the 1820s, our first Southern Baptist seminary was Southern Seminary in 1859. From the time we added seminary, originally it was saying, well, who didn't study that in college? Or who wants to dig a little bit deeper than what they learned in college? And so we've always sort of led with training pastors and other ministry leaders. And then out of that has evolved whatever else comes, whether that's a liberal arts college, or whether that's an R1 university like Baylor, or lots of things that are in between small liberal arts college and the one research Baptist university. But we've always begun with theological education. And again, with seminaries, that's, in some Bible colleges, that's the bread and butter. But with almost every Baptist institution, theological education's been at the heart. And then what are the other things that we feel like the Lord's calling us to do that aren't capital T theological education, but let's say they are theologically and missionally informed education. And that's predominantly what you find in Baptist higher education today.
So kind of piggybacking on that, plenty of like Christian churches or denominations also have educational institutions. Presbyterians have them, Methodists have them, Catholics have them. What would you say makes a Baptist institution distinctive in terms of their education? Or would you say anything makes them distinctive? And if so, what is that?
Yeah. So I think that there are three things that make Baptist education distinctive. And I don't want to over-argue this because you do find this among other types of institutions. But I think you almost always find it around Baptist institutions. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying we're the only ones who care about this, but we always care about this. So the first thing is the easy one. It's the low-hanging fruit. There's nothing theological about it. Baptist people started it. So I mean, not trying to be funny, but seriously, I mean, the first thing that happens, first distinctive, is that it's some group of Baptists, whether it's a pastor, a church, an association, or a state convention, or a denomination, some Baptist or group of Baptists say, we need a school to do X, Y, Z. But I think what you're probably asking is more along the lines of what in the DNA makes it distinctive, not just that it owns the Baptist label or it was started by Baptist people. And Drew Dickerson and I were talking about this yesterday. I was thrilled to know that Drew has studied this and that he's right, because he's been thinking about this too. There's really two things that I think are distinctive about Baptist education. One of them is a close connection to local churches. Again, sometimes it might be a church, or sometimes it might be a group of local churches, an association or a state convention. But there's no doubt that regardless of the name of the school, regardless of the programs they have, in many ways, our institutions are Baptist consistently to the degree that they are closely tethered to local churches. And so we've always, I know it's one of our sister seminaries' mottos that they're for the church. But that's really Baptist higher education and theological education everywhere. It's not just branding for one school, it's really in all of our DNA. And so there's always been this close connection to local churches, and I don't think it's an accident that the more disconnected, what we call town and gown, get, the more disconnected the Baptists in the area are from the church, the more from the institution, the more likely the institution begins to drift away from its Baptist heritage or redefine what that Baptist heritage means. The second thing is not anything that is necessarily curricular, though it is often curricular, and that is Baptist institutions have always been deeply committed to mission. Now, I'm intentionally not using that word in the plural, missions. I'm using mission as the broader category. I think it includes missions. What I'm going to call evangelism, public witness, and service, kind of that cluster of things. There's always been this applied feel to Baptist schools that we're not just filling people's heads and we're not just forming their hearts, but we are mobilizing them to do good with emphasis on sharing the gospel, but not just sharing the gospel. Again, serving others, planting churches, becoming healthcare providers or public school educators or whatever, but taking a very Christian vocational sense of mission with them into that. And even in schools like my school, where students aren't required to be believers, still wanting those values to form them, even if they're not yet a follower of Christ, we want them to be appreciative of our sense of mission and how their role is for the sake of the flourishing of others. It's not just a job. It's not just what they do. And so I don't think it's any accident that whenever you look around at Baptist seminaries, we're in a Baptist seminary, we tend to put out lots of missionaries. Even the least mission-minded Baptist seminary tends to put out more missionaries than the most mission-minded seminaries in most other denominations. Does that make sense? And if you look at Baptist colleges and universities, it shouldn't be any surprise that often a Christian studies or religion department and on the co-curricular side, campus ministry is at the heart of a school's identity, and everything else kind of grows out of that. And so that close connectedness to the churches and that very kind of missional posture that you find in institutions, I think those two things, again, they're not unique to Baptists, but I think they are distinctive to Baptist education.
Yeah, and as a product of Baptist education, so my alma mater is the school that you're currently teaching.
Your alma mater pays my bills.
Exactly. And so I remember, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I remember the first event that happened every year when we would start the semester. We began, and you may or may not still do this, we began with kind of an evangelistic crusade, an evangelistic tent meeting, if you will, right out kind of on the lawn, sharing the gospel with those who showed up at the very start, all organized just like you were talking about, that close connection to the local church, all organized by local churches right there in the area.
Yeah, so it's not a tent meeting, but anymore, it's in the chapel, but
Okay.
it is still very much an evangelistic event that we begin with. And so our very first chapel is the president doing a convocation. He kind of sets the tone for the year. But then the first full week of chapel is a spiritual emphasis week that are 3 to 5 sermons where the emphasis is evangelism and disciple making. And so we still begin with that. And then about 4 or 5 weeks into school, our second major emphasis is our Great Commission Week, Global Mission or Global Engagement Week, Global Mission Week, I think we call it. And we'll have missionaries from IMB and a number of other organizations, and we'll have 4 sermons or sometimes talks or testimonies that are all built around Great Commission faithfulness. And so, that's still very much a part of the school's DNA. And one of the most appealing things to me and my family about North Greenville, and I don't mean this with any disrespect to any other institution, including the one that's very graciously housing me right now, North Greenville is the most evangelistic Baptist institution I've ever been a part of. And just willing to be countercultural and say, hey, yeah, we care a lot about education. We're an educational institution, but we are going to share the gospel with every single student that comes through here multiple times. And having faculty members in various disciplines that are willing to be fools for Christ when it comes to sharing the gospel with others, even while also having PhDs, sometimes from some of the most prestigious universities in the country and teaching in secular disciplines, but being committed to disciple making in the way that they approach that. And so North Greenville is maybe especially strong in that way. But even if, it's maybe a little edgy, but even if you go to some of our schools that are less theologically conservative, Like maybe the religion department isn't as trustworthy as it once was, and you wouldn't want your kid to go there and major in Bible or something like that. It is still the case in most of those schools that they have a campus ministry that's committed to evangelism and discipleship and partnering with local churches to advance the Great Commission and contribute to human flourishing. It's just in our DNA as Baptist institutions.
So we are a part of Baptist institutions. How do we balance kind of education with the idea of local church autonomy? So you have this idea where, people are formed within the church, right? They're formed within the church. Really, in some sense, Baptist education almost begins within the church.
It should.
It should. If I ask you right now, if you could trot out the RA motto, would you?
I would not be able to because I was not raised in the Baptist tradition.
Okay, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. But so you got this kind of connection to local church autonomy. How do you kind of walk that tightrope?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Where, in a seminary or a college, you may have many questions that may be handled in a different way when you get to the church level. But in say a seminary or a college, you have to kind of think, how do we address this?
That's a really good question. So it definitely looks a little bit different in every Baptist institution because who that school is, what their tradition is, the churches in the neighborhood, if you will, all of that contributes. So let me talk a little bit about maybe the two universities that I've been in most recently. And even half the time I was at Southeastern, I taught in the undergraduate program. So let me focus on undergraduate education. I don't think Baptist institutions should ever compete with local churches. And as much as possible, we need to be saying, that's what the church does. So how can we come alongside what the church does and help them to do it, or help provide them with people to be a part of it? So I definitely think that should be our posture. So there's the ideal. Now let me talk about the realism. That works great when you have healthy churches that are forming healthy students to go to healthy Baptist institutions. I've been blessed to only work in healthy Baptist institutions. There are some dysfunctional ones. All the ones I've been in are healthy. And it would be the case that many of the students who come, even the students who love Jesus, even the students who've been on 3 short-term mission trips in high school, even the students who were youth group kids, even the students who say, I want to be a missionary or I want to be a youth minister, arrive at college as freshmen and they are functionally biblically illiterate. And many of them are from our healthiest churches. And I'm sure it's not because that youth minister and those small group and Sunday school teachers and that senior pastor weren't working their bottoms off to form them. I'm just telling you, when they arrive, they don't know what the first 5 books of the Bible are, and they don't know the difference between Moses and Noah, and they don't know that Revelation and the rest of Scripture clearly teaches a post-tribulational rapture. They just don't know those things whenever they come. And so part of what we find ourselves doing is forming those students. We're not doing it in competition with the church. We're doing it because they didn't get that. Sometimes that's the church's fault. Sometimes it's the kid's fault, and it's a maturity thing. And sometimes it's a combination. But what we don't have the luxury of doing is saying, man, that kid came out of Calvary Baptist Church. She ought to know that. You know, we don't teach the students we wish we had. We teach the students that we have. And we have. And so we are very much trying to compensate for biblical and theological illiteracy. And in many ways, we're trying to take these students who are very zealous for good works. They want to win the lost. They want to serve the hurting. They want to turn the world upside down. They just don't know the Bible. And they don't know doctrine outside of maybe, what it means to be saved, and then they trust the Bible and whatnot, the exclusivity of Christ. And so, we're trying to form them. And so we're always walking the tightrope. We don't want to be the church. But in the providence of God, sometimes we do things that they didn't get at the church for whatever reason. And I'm talking about the believing kids. And then we've also have lost kids. We may be their first introduction to the Bible. The first worship service they've ever sat in of any sort might be that first chapel service. The first evangelistic presentation they've ever heard might come at an orientation week or something like that. And by the way, this happens in seminaries too.
I still remember. I have a close personal friend who told me he came to seminary wanting to go and be a missionary. Literally sat in chapel, listened to opening convocation, and realized I'm not saved.
Well, when I moved here as a Master of Divinity student, I was a library assistant. I worked in this building for 3 years. And as a 20-hour-a-week library assistant, my first year here, I was in a little office on the second floor. That's where the archives were located at the time, over on this corner here. I think they're somewhere different now. And I was in the office, and I'd been here 6 weeks, a month, something like that. The very first person I shared the gospel with in Wake Forest, North Carolina, was a seminary student who came and sat down, asked for a service, I forget what it was, needed me to do something, and just started vocalizing some questions he had about ultimate matters, making small talk. And about halfway through the conversation, I realized this dude is lost. And he didn't come to faith in Christ that day, but he heard the gospel that day, including a call to repent and believe. And so we can't make any assumptions about the students who are in front of us, and that they all need the gospel, whether they're going to be believing it for the very first time, or whether they're going to be reminded about the truths that have formed them for years and years and years.
Good word. So you're a historian.
Allegedly.
You are a historian. And so being a historian, what do you think about the future of Baptist education? What does it look like?
That's not a question you ask historians. They stone people in the Bible who get predictions about the future wrong. Good grief. You work in a seminary, you ought to know that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, anybody who tells you they know exactly what's going to happen with Baptist higher education, don't buy anything from that guy or that lady, because nobody knows for sure. Here's what I do know. We're going to have to get more creative. We're going to have either more types of schools or more types of programs in schools that meet students where they are, instead of forcing them to come and be a part of what we're doing. We're just going to have to do that because the world is driving us in that direction. And we're going to have to figure out not just how to give people traditional degrees, but how to equip them in ways that might not lead to some sort of degree or credential. Because they're going to want the information, but they don't care about the piece of paper. And they're willing to be engaged for this conversation, but they don't have the bandwidth or the money to do something that's this long, or whatever the case might be. And so if we're going to survive, instead of saying we're in the business of granting a bachelor's degree or a master of divinity or a doctor of ministry or a PhD or whatever the case might be, we have to take a step back and say we are in the business of theologically educating individuals. And so what does it mean for such a time as this to theologically educate individuals? And I'm confident that that'll continue to mean we're granting degrees and some students are sitting in classes or they're parts of virtual classes. I don't think that's going to change. But I do think there will be other ingredients introduced into that stew. And we've got to be creative, and we've got to look at these campuses, since we're on a campus right now, we've got to look at campuses not as sort of this semi-monastic place where people come for 3 to 5 years. I mean, there will be people who do that, but this campus is a hub of theological education that is meeting different types of students in different places in different ways, helping them in whatever way it needs to help them, always making the case, hey, you really ought to spend 78 hours working on a Master of Divinity, or you really ought to consider that next step into a Doctor of Ministry, or whatever. It's always going to do that. But how do we remind ourselves we're in the education business, not the degree granting business, and let the credentialing flow from our philosophy of education, rather than saying, if we're doing what we've always done and they just don't get it, how are we going to survive? We need to adapt, and we need to be nimble. Theological education existed before there were brick and mortar institutions, and it may exist after there are brick and mortar institutions. But right now, we're in that muddy middle the time of turmoil and chaos. And we've got to figure out how to adapt, but adapt in ways that are consistent with our missions and our identities, and not capitulate in ways that would be inappropriate.
And this isn't even really a new area for Baptists. So one of the first ways that you and I bonded, we both worked in the archives at Southern Seminary.
The chives.
The chives, as we call it. And I remember this project. You probably remember this too. We had to go through the catalogs of Southern Seminary and document
Absolutely.
every single student and what classes they graduated in.
Right.
And we got to the end of the project, and I think it was something like in the first 30 years, only 11% of the students actually graduated
Right.
as a full graduate from the institution.
Right.
Most of them were coming to the institution and were simply taking a class or two in biblical introduction or Old Testament because they needed that to be able to preach well.
That's right. They were taking what they could get when they could get it. And some of them were coming even seasonally. And so they would come for a season and they would go back to the farm, and they'd come a couple of years later and they'd go back to the farm. And so, that sort of approach where it's, and you know, this all flows out of, we're getting really nerdy here, J.P. Boyce's 3 Changes in Theological Education, where you're meeting 3 different levels of students at different levels. From the very beginning, we've been thinking that way about theological education, and I think we need to continue to think that way. One of the ways this looks in our context is to recognize, and I think it looks a little bit like this at Southeastern, but maybe more so at a university. We have a growing number of students who don't feel called to be pastors or missionaries, but she's a nonprofit leader who wants some theological training. Or he's a public school educator who wants some theological training. And so what does it even look like to do a Master of Leadership? It's actually a program I designed. A Master of Leadership where 40% of the content overlaps with what you would be getting in a Master of Arts in Christian Education. But you're also getting 21 hours of organizational leadership and emotional intelligence and leading teams and next generation leadership and the same things you might get in an MBA program. Because there's a market out there for people who are thinking missionally about the business world or the nonprofit world. And so that's a traditional degree, but it's an outside the box version of a traditional degree. So again, always thinking about, how do we get as much Bible, theology, and ministry in as many people as possible? Now, returning to Southeastern, same thing, but without losing your bread and butter, your primary reason of existence, which is training pastors and pastor-like leaders for the church.
So you've done this now. You've been involved in Baptist education as someone who leads it for about 17 years.
That's right.
So what aspects of Baptist education encourage you right now?
I think probably the most encouraging thing that I see in Baptist education is that second identity marker that I mentioned a few minutes ago, just kind of that missional feel to Baptist education. I'm really excited at how our universities and the handful of Bible colleges that we have, and certainly our theological seminaries, are committed to applied education. I mean, we're vocational institutions in the biblical sense of that term. Don't think the community college down the road, but we're vocational institutions. We're not just filling students' heads with knowledge, but we are equipping them to be faithful. Southeastern's mission statement, equipping them to serve the church and fulfill the Great Commission. Our mission statement is equipping them to be transformational leaders for church and society. That's basically saying the same thing, but one way applied to a seminary context and one way applied to a more diverse university context. So I'm still really, really encouraged by that. And I'm also really encouraged by the way Baptist higher education is responding to the controversial issues in our culture. So there are many schools in the Christian tradition that are capitulating whenever it comes to LGBTQ+, sanctity of human life, religious liberty and human dignity. And what they're saying is, wow, culture is shifting, and if we're going to survive, we have to figure out how to compromise with the culture and then not give up too much. But if we're perceived as being countercultural, moms and dads aren't going to send their kids to our institutions, or master students are going to want to go somewhere that's more winsome than we are and whatnot. And listen, there's a bad way to be a culture warrior, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about being consistently Christian in a world of confusion when it comes to these ethical issues. And what I'm seeing is our most theologically conservative institutions are speaking with one voice about biblical ethics and authentic human flourishing. And I'm even seeing some of our centrist institutions move towards greater faithfulness because of these issues. And so maybe they got a little bit wobbly on a couple of secondary doctrinal issues, but now they're seeing all these cultural pressures that are happening, and they're saying, whoa, 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 we've gone a couple of steps too far. And if we're going to remain Christian, we need to move a couple of steps back. And so I think in the providence of God, He's using this decadence of our culture and this turmoil to remind Christian institutions that there is a cost to discipleship, and that we're called to be faithful first rather than just growing for the sake of growing. And in some ways, trusting the Lord that if we're faithful, even if we get bad press, the sort of people who ought to be in our institutions will want to be in our institutions precisely because we're being faithful. And so I'm very encouraged to see that happening in kind of our circles right now.
Okay. So what concerns do you have about Baptist education?
With a couple of exceptions, every single Baptist institution, whether it's Southeastern Seminary, North Greenville, or the schools that some of you seminary students graduated from, and this applies to more than just Baptist education. You're not asking about this, but I think this is true of evangelical higher education writ large. Every one of us are the institutional versions of the family that lives paycheck to paycheck. And there's only 2 or 3 exceptions to that. So we are all just a handful of bad years away from having to make really hard decisions. Not the hardest decision necessarily, but making really hard decisions about programs and faculty and things like that. So I get asked on an almost weekly basis by pastors or business leaders or whoever, how are things at North Greenville University? And my answer is pithy and corny, but it's always the same. We don't have any problems that more students, more money, and less government wouldn't solve. And I think that's true of evangelical higher education in general. And so everybody is finding creative ways to stretch the dollar. And they're finding creative ways to get more students whenever there's never going to be the same world as students moving off like they used to go to places. So everybody's having to get creative, and they're having to think outside of the box while also say, how do we protect ourselves from the storm that's kind of coming from the outside with cultural stuff? That part's less encouraging. But I think that God and the Holy Spirit's giving leaders wisdom, and I see schools being faithful. But I mean, I wake up and I say, man, what happens if we have 4 years in a row and we don't hit our enrollment marks? What happens if we have 3 years in a row and we only get 2/3 of our advancement markers? What happens if Uncle Sam decides X, Y, Z and we're forced to take up our cross in that area? Those are real existential questions that I think every Baptist institution and every evangelical institution is facing. And we're part of a couple of groups. The 6 seminaries are a cohort. We have an international Association of Baptist Colleges and Universities that includes colleges and seminaries. We have an International Alliance of Christian Education that includes theologically orthodox evangelical schools, and there's overlap between those groups. And when we get together, and when me and my counterparts, presidents, chief academic officers, chief operating officers, deans, whenever we get together amongst ourselves in our little nerd fests, we're not talking about theology. We can talk about that some, but I mean, we're talking about fundraising and partnerships and enrollment and cultural pressures, and how do we honor Jesus and stay faithful to our missions for such a time as this? So we're in a volatile market. You guys are stakeholders right now in a volatile market, and we don't know what the future holds. But we know who holds the future. That was very preachy, wasn't it? And we know that we're parts of institutions that are striving to remain faithful, whatever might come. And we're going to trust the Lord that He'll honor that faithfulness with whatever His blessings ought to look like in the right time and in the right way.
So piggybacking on that, what advice would you have for those who are interested in teaching within a Baptist institution or serving within a Baptist institution?
Yeah, I knew I was going to be asked this question. So, since I only know a couple of you, I'm hoping that means it's harder for me to offend you, since we don't know each other very well. You're not going to get a teaching job full-time. You're probably not. So, let me begin with the bad news, and then I'll get to the good news. The bad news is every single Christian institution and every single denomination in every single context is thinking, how can I shrink my faculty? What can I do? How can I replace 3 people with 1 one person? My Baptist education gave me bad grammar. Yeah, how can we, I mean, everybody's asking that question. At my institution, I'm looking at a Christian studies faculty of about 15 people and saying, how can I make that 9 without firing anybody? Because these are good people who are doing good work. And so how do we move to that? As students at Southeastern, you've seen what's happened to the faculty here. When I started here, it was 70-something full-time faculty. That's happening everywhere. So if you're saying, I'm that guy though, like other people, they're not going to get that job, but I'm that guy. You might be, because there will always be people who get those jobs, but there's not many. And I just need to tell you, for every Old Testament or New Testament position that opens up at North Greenville, I have 75 resumes before I get to the mediocre people. We're hiring a missiologist right now because we need a missiologist. And we're not contracting. We need to hire a missiologist. I've got 30-something resumes before I get to the people that I roll my eyes about. Like good candidates. And so this is just where we are in Christian higher education. So the bad news is the full-time brick and mortar jobs where this is all you do are shrinking. Now here's the good news. If your calling is to teach, but that doesn't necessarily mean being a full-time professor, then there's lots of opportunities. And I can think of at least 3 different pathways, one of which works for some people and 2 of which the sky's the limit. So first, the one that works for some people. A conversation I have with everybody I talk to about PhD studies is there anything else you can do in addition to teaching? What skills or experiences do you have that can make you indispensable to an institution? And oh yeah, by the way, you also have a terminal degree, and so you can teach a class or 2. And would you be comfortable doing that? And if you like crunching numbers in a business office, or if you like working in a library, or if you like strategically thinking through how to mobilize people for distance education, or if you like fundraising or have experience with fundraising, there's always going to be opportunities for people who just help run the institutions and are able to teach a class or 2. So one question you need to be saying is there anything in my experience or my skill set that makes me indispensable, and I'm there, and that means I can teach a little bit? That's not going to work for everybody, but it'll work for many. Now here's where the sky's the limit. And first we'll call this the gray sky, and then there's the blue sky where it's really the limit. So the gray sky, but still a lot of places. Some combination of being primarily in a local church or working for some other ministry and having a sanctified side hustle that's teaching. That teaching might be college or seminary. It might be Christian K-12 teaching. It might be a teaching pastor gig in a local church where you're developing a lay theological institute, but you're also the student minister or the worship pastor or whatever. There's all kinds of out-of-the-box opportunities to do those sorts of things. And for every full-time professor that we're hiring, we're hiring 15 adjuncts who are able to teach a class or two, but he's the pastor of that church, or she works part-time as the women's ministry coordinator at the state convention, or whatever the case might be. So I mean, we're always, and not just us, but everybody's doing that. And let me tell you something, there will come a day, I can get away with saying this because I don't work for Southeastern Seminary full-time, there will come a day where Southeastern is going to have 25 full-time faculty, and it's going to have 50 or 60 pastors who are affiliated faculty teaching 3 or 4 classes a year. And then there'll be people who teach a class here and a class there that are traditional adjuncts. That middle sort of area where you are both a practitioner and a scholar with a foot in both worlds, and it's not just I supplement my income by teaching a class for liberty, and it's not I'm a full-time professor, that's going to grow. And it's especially going to grow in theological education. So it's gray sky. There is a ceiling, but there's a lot of leeway that's there. Where the sky's the limit is teaching internationally and going overseas, whether it's teaching in a brick and mortar school, and there's lots of opportunities to do that, K-12, college, and seminary, or whether it's coming up with creative outside-the-box ways to do theological education in a missions context. That's where the sky's the limit. But just to put this in perspective, as best as I can tell, I'm not like a metrics reader when it comes to blogging or social media or anything like that. But anecdotally, I think in the last 10 years, the most widely read thing that I've written, or at least the most widely distributed and commented upon thing that I've written, was a one-off blog post for the University of St. Andrews Divinity School, because one of my former students from here was a PhD student there and recommended that I do it. And it was, what do I do with my PhD if there are no full-time teaching jobs? And I talked about these 3 things 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I have had dozens and dozens and dozens of emails and social media messages over the years by people who were in a PhD program or considering a PhD program, and they found that and said, I've never thought about this stuff before. I wanted to do what my professors were doing. But now I see my professors are retiring and they're not being replaced. So now this helps me to ask the question, do I want to do that PhD? Or is that initial ministry calling still what I think the Lord's doing, and so I'm going to go be a pastor or missionary or whatever? If it's about education, there will continue to be lots of opportunities for you to be a theological educator. But you cannot start a PhD program at Southeastern Seminary or at Yale University and say, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to be the guy that gets the full-time job. You might be, but the door that opens up will be so random and inexplicable for why you and not these other qualified people that you just can't bank on that. You've got to be willing to say, I'm open to doing something else, even if in God's providence, I am that guy that's in the right place at the right time with the right connection and the right moment to step in and become the full-time church historian at that school that's actually looking to hire a full-time church historian.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.